All right, well, tonight we are into the 17th chapter of the book of Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ. This is our 23rd lesson. I've taken our title of this particular chapter from the very first verse with one slight modification. I just, for some reason, even though it's biblical, it's the word that's there, I changed it a slight bit and talk about the judgment of the great harlot. The verse, of course, says, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. But this is what John was shown by the angel. This judgment scene, and I want to make that clear because that's part of my, really, again, just a 2-point outline. The judgment scene can be divided into two sections. The first is the scene described in verses 1 through 7. That's the scene described, the judgment of the great harlot. And then the scene explained in verses 8 through 18. Now you can break even those up a little bit more. The first two verses kind of seem to set apart. And then from verse 3 to verse 7, more of the scene is just simply described. But we'll get into that and look a little bit more at it and see some of the things that are here. But just so that you know, as we go through this, and you'll see some symbolism, you'll see a picture per se. And you get midway through this, and John writes it and expresses the effect that this scene had on him. And that's where then the division comes, because the angel's kind of like, John, why are you so amazed? I'll show you what it all means. And that's where we're kind of going. Just again, a little bit of review, if you remember, before we get into these sections, to remind you that the armies of the world are being gathered at the valley of Megiddo. Basically, they're being gathered for the Battle of Armageddon. That's next on the schedule, just about. The 7 angels have poured out their 7 vials. We saw the earth, the oceans, the seas, the rivers of the world. We saw the sun and its effect upon men. We saw the worshipers of the beast and the beast himself experiencing the wrath of God out of those vials. Then we read in verse 1, and there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, and I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. John's personal interpretation of all of this that causes him to wonder isn't really given to us. But we do see his reaction, and we see how the angel responds to his characterized response. But as we take note of the symbols used, we can look at it carefully, because John is also going to give us the explanation that the angel gave to him. In fact, if you look again, it's the angel, to put it in my words, come here, John. And when he did that, that wasn't really a voluntary request. It wasn't wait. He didn't wait. The angel didn't wait whether John would show up or not. He's going to transport John to a symbolic scene. And in that, he tells him, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great harlot. So with that, and we begin just a little bit with the great harlot, a little bit further explanation, but with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Now you can get the picture of the words that are being used. The judgment appears to be about her rule over the kings of the earth, and the fact that it takes and is accomplished with great deceit, along with there are broken contracts and treaties that seem to be clearly in view here. The first part I don't think it's very difficult to understand. But when we see this angel, then what do we have? In verse 3, the angel carries him away. That's why when he said, come here, John, it's kind of like sometimes you talk to your children when they were younger. Come here. Or anybody, come here. You expect them to move. The angel did not expect John to do anything. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. While he's there, he says, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, John is letting you see what he saw. And it's not very hard. John saw this woman with blasphemous names, 7 heads, 10 horns, all over the beast, sitting, I should say, all over this scarlet-colored beast with these blasphemous names. He then describes her attire, her jewelry, and her corruption in verses 4 and 5, which says, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. I would imagine without going too far, you're already getting a picture of her and her corruption and what she's doing politically. And this has to do more with ecclesiastically. We've already seen somewhat of the politics and the kingdom being hit in darkness, total darkness. But then it says in verse 5, and upon her forehead. That's a pretty obvious place, don't you think? Upon her forehead, not hidden, not under a cloak, not behind a robe, but on her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now, I would say this is not a silent opinion. The angel shows John a name written upon her forehead. The corruption of this woman then is well known. It's well advertised. It's just like if you would, a prostitute or a harlot isn't going to get much business if she doesn't advertise herself. And that's what this is being stated right here. This is not a physical prostitute. We're talking about spiritual fornication. We're talking about political fornication. That's what's here in this. So we're talking about something really, the corruption of this woman is well known and branded as a matter, really it's a matter of pride and not of shame. But then to me, we read something even worse than her business ruling practices and her corrupt religion. In verse 6 we see, in the woman, I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints. Again, she's not drinking the saints' blood, but we can understand what that means. She's killing them. And we've already seen that in these previous chapters. So again, this is almost like a parenthetical statement again about what's going on. She's made drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, notice what he says. He characterizes his response. He's not telling you anything other than what he says. I wondered with great admiration. The woman out of all the earth singles out one group on the earth to persecute. There's little left to the imagination to this. We don't need to force some strange interpretation on these verses that we've just read. This woman is empowered and driven by the beast. She's riding on the beast. Driven, led by, empowered by. And in that she has chosen to persecute those who believe in and worship Jesus as their only king. These are the people that is talked about, that they will not bow to the beast. They will not receive the mark of the beast. So what does she do? She goes about to kill them. Again, John notices or writes his own reaction. I wondered with great admiration. It's very interesting. The words there are thumazo, megas, and thuma. Thuma and thumazo are almost identical. They're the same words. When I saw her, I wondered. That's the thumazo. I wondered with great. That's the megas. Remember, that's the same word we've seen before with great. And thermo is just the idea, again, of the same wonder. So if we were going to, I marveled with big marvel. That's kind of where that is. The root word is marvel, and yet we have thumazo. I marveled with great marvel. John, I think, really scrutinized what he saw. He may have even agonized over what he saw. But something in these words describe John's surprise. You remember when I talked in a previous lesson, I didn't really like the word marvel that much to use it, or I wondered. Kind of, it gives you a little bit of admiration, but here we've got the word right out. This is the way they translated it. King James, guys, it's the same word that's wondered is translated marvel. The only difference is the form of it. It's the same root word in both of those. But it's something there that causes his response. And I think it's just a marvel almost of ignorance, of being overwhelmed by the scene. I don't want to make it sound demeaning when I say ignorance, but it's like it's such a mystery. And this whole picture is something that's strange. And so the angel takes note of this. Again, let me read those last words. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And then verse 7, and the angel said unto me, why didst thou marvel? Why are you so surprised at this? What is it that you see that has caused you a lack of understanding? But then he goes, I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. So I want to give you a little bit, again, to remind you that verse there that's in 7, and you see the picture of the woman, we see the beast, we see the 7 heads, we see the 10 horns, and if we kind of go back to the first verse, I'm going to drag this one in there, the waters. Because remember, he says, I saw the woman standing on the waters. So when you look at those 5 different things that are shown to John, it's unexplained exactly what they are. And so I think that's why you have this description of the judgment of the great harlot. But as it takes place, this is why John marvels. He doesn't quite understand it. So the angel says, well, I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to tell you. I've shown you. Now I'm going to tell you the mystery of the woman. So that's why when we go from verse 8 all the way through verse 18, it's not the scene described anymore. Now it's the scene explained. And so the angel says, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now, twice in this verse, you see this repetition of this almost riddle type explanation of wondering about the beast that was, is not, and yet is. The angel uses this verse or this phrase twice in this verse as a description of the beast, and in another verse as well. Well, the key to understanding that riddle comes in the very next verse. A lot of times when we read, we get confused by a verse and we just stay with that verse. and you stay with that verse, and you stay with that verse, and you're no better off and you can't figure it out. A lot of times what you need to do when you get a little confused, keep reading. Keep reading. Remember what the angel told John. Don't sit there and wonder. I'm going to explain it all to you. So when somebody tells you, well, it's so symbolic, yeah, but we also understand the symbolism is explained to us too. You can't make something up that isn't in here on this one. So he begins to, well, let me stop here. You can speculate as to the identity. You can say, well, this is the Roman Empire. This is the Roman Catholic Church. This is the Pontiff. This is the Antichrist, and that's who that's going to be. Or this is going to be Muhammad and Islam. You can speculate. We don't know. Over the centuries, as you would read commentators who wrote, they would write according to what their knowledge was about the geography of the world and about the particular elements of creation that we know about. I won't give you some of the fanciful ideas, but when people would read about those creatures that would come up out of the bottomless pit, and they had the ability to sting men with their tails, but the way that John was describing it, you could sit there and say, well, you and I would have a better idea of maybe that was a helicopter, shooting out of their tail. I don't know what that is, but it seems to me they were creatures that were really from out of hell, out of the bottomless pit. You also see the fact that it talks about how and we'll see this further, when Jesus shows up, everybody's going to see him, every eye. How is that possible when there's people living on the other side of the planet? Because he takes his time and the planet turns? Or it's going to be the fact that you've got a news cycle of 24. In fact, you probably could look it up on if it was happening right now, every one of you could look it up on your phone and see it happening live. That's going to happen. But can you imagine someone's imagination 150, 250 years ago? You'd have no clue. It's just like one night, I can still remember, and when we lived in Citrus Heights, and I'm on Rush Drive, and I remember a lot of times I was working very late nights or sometimes graveyard, but I would get home, and I can remember watching TV. One night it was like, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was an advertisement for this strange thing that was becoming available from the banks. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there it is. There's the card. That's the devil card. There's your ATM card, your debit card that we all use right now. It was a preliminary to the fact that there's going to come a time when there's going to be a control put out. You can't buy or sell with this. You can tell that that's going to begin to be a part where there's one of these days there isn't going to be any more cash, not going to be any more dollars. Things are going to change. Well, you couldn't understand that. I mean, that's probably 40 plus years ago that I can remember seeing that. I wanted to go wake Pat up and tell her the Antichrist is coming. He's look, it's happening. Anyway, while we can only speculate, you can clearly see that the character is demonically empowered, and it is a world leader and a religious leader. And you can see their end. You can see that they are doomed. This woman, of course, is empowered by the beast, and the beast is a demonic power. It's a satanic power. And this woman is a world power and a corrupt leader. Look at verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. You'll be able to figure it out if you're born again. You'll be able to figure it out before the world does. You'll be able to see and understand who and what's going on. You're not going to be blinded by it if you're around. I don't plan on being around. But those people, this Bible is written for those that are going to be in the great tribulation too. And he says, here's the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Now, this is where, too, a lot of commentators from a point of history will tell you about the different, whether it's the Grecian kingdom, the Medo-Persian kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian kingdom, and then the Roman kingdom, and how that one is going to be resuscitated or revived, and it's only going to last for a long time. Well, I don't know which ones these power bases are, which kingdoms they are. But I'm going to tell you, if you're around, you're going to be able to see it and understand it very clearly. You and I already are shocked at the way our world is changing. If you watched our vice president speak in Munich, Germany, just recently, he gave a speech, and I think I mentioned it in our Sunday school class, where he talked about how that there in Germany, I think it was Germany, but now I think it was, where there was a man that was standing out in front of an abortion clinic. He was not carrying any placards, no signs. He wasn't advertising. He wasn't saying a word. He was silently praying on the sidewalk. But police came and asked him, "What are you doing?" "I'm praying," silently. "What are you praying for?" "My wife and I aborted a child, and I'm praying for forgiveness. I'm praying that God would save others, that they might not do the same." And they arrested him. They arrested him not on what he was doing, because they had no idea. They had to ask. They're arresting that man on thoughts. Our vice president was condemning the idea and saying, "Listen, Europeans, you're getting further and further away from us. We uphold free speech." Here you're arresting someone who didn't even speak. He gave another example of the same thing. But it's the fact that, listen, people are trying to rob us of our free speech rights. And that's one of the things that our forefathers wrote into and is the very first freedom that we have. That's not going to last, because it's going to go away. Well, anyway, we can see the 7 heads of the 7 mountains. They're not necessarily hills, as some try to identify it as, again, Roman Catholic Church being on the 7 hills of Rome. The angel goes on, and there in verse 10, we saw that upon each one of these 7 mountains sits a king. 7 kings, 7 kingdoms upon those elevated places in the world. Going back to the Old Testament, this is where we could get long, but I won't. You can find Daniel speaking about what most commentators say are the kingdoms, like I said before, of Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, the Babylonian kingdom, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. You have to remember, too, that the Roman Empire was still in power in John's day. So many commentators describe them as the kingdom that is. Well, whoever and whatever these powers may be, we see that the woman will be a temporary power. Oh, yeah, she'll be a world power. But that rule is short-lived, and she is doomed for judgment. Verse 11. And the beast, here we go again, the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth in perdition. In other words, death, raised from death too. We'll see Satan empower him to come back. And the 10 horns, which thou sawest, are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. We see the ability of the beast. We see this world leader will gain power willingly over these others that she empowers, or the beast empowers. We know that if we go back through and remember about the beast that we've already seen, in chapter 11 and verse 7, we saw the beast ascend out of the bottomless pit. And we also saw that the beast, rose up to cause all nations to worship the image of the beast through a miraculous power. It'll also cause the world to accept the mark of the beast. And remember, the mark of the beast is the man, not now just a power, but it's invested in a particular man, which is 666, and the beast will end up deceiving the whole world. We saw that in verse 8. But God's judgment will fall, and those nations, when they make war with the Lamb, and that's exactly what you're going to see in verse 13 and 14, these have one man, and shall give their power, or one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. They voluntarily submit to the beast. And what's going to happen? All of these shall make war with the Lamb. Doesn't last long, though. The Lamb shall overcome them. Why? Because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. He will sit upon his throne after defeating and judging the woman and the beast. Jesus is the Lamb of God, and he is coming to sit and rule upon his throne, again, to claim as the rightful heir that he will be and is even now the King of kings and Lord of lords. You see it in verse 15. And he saith unto me, this is why I told you I included the waters. He saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are the peoples, the multitudes, and nations, and tongues. You have to look at this, and let me go ahead and show you verse 16, because the hatred is so intense. And the deception is so strong that eventually it will end up destroying the beast. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. In other words, they're going to consume themselves. They're going to be so bothered by everything, however this works out, that this is what they're going to do. And why will they do it? What will cause them to be so full of violence and hate against the one that they had previously chosen to be their leaders? Do you know why? Look at verse 17. For God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and to give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. Now, you have to stop and go, wait a minute. Didn't they just make war with the Lamb, or isn't that said what they're going to do? Didn't they just ally themselves with the one who blasphemed the name of God? God is not the author of sin, we know that. Their hate has moved them to act, but we also see that the results of their actions are fulfilling the ultimate purpose of God's will. This isn't any different than the fact of the Jews were moved by hate to crucify our Lord and Savior on Calvary. If you remember, God had an ultimate plan of redemption. And just like it is stated in Acts chapter 2 and verse 23, where it says, him, talking about Jesus Christ, being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, Peter said, you have taken and by wicked hands have crucified and slain. See, men can do whatever they want to do, but they're ultimately, it doesn't mean that God's the one that got them to do that. He allows them, but God so overrules what they're doing that he brings about his will in the end. They crucified Jesus Christ, but that was where our redemption was purchased, in the death of Christ. The very thing by which they sought to destroy him is the very thing by which God chose to give us redemption and save our souls. It's with that same power and purpose and wisdom that God's will was accomplished by the wicked acts of these wicked people, even the beast and the woman. God's purpose, God's aim will be fulfilled, not the nations who have risen against the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And the angel finally reveals the meaning of the woman. Who is the woman, by the way? A lot of speculation goes on, but it's pretty clear when we get to the last verse. In fact, we already may know because we've read enough of this. The wise have figured it out. But the angel makes it clear in verse 18, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city. Well, you just have to go back up to verse 5. Remember, she's got it stamped on her forehead. The great Babylon, the great harlot, the mother of all harlots. Babylon the Great, the kingdom of the beast, that city, Babylon, is this great city of idolatry. It is the religious center and even political controller of all the world's people. It is the place that is calling for the worship of the beast, the Antichrist. This woman is opulently adorned, an obvious deceiver who has seduced the world to follow her wicked ways and fight against the Lord of glory. All false religion are given life and power from her, and they willingly give obeisance to her. But her descent and her doom are ordained by God. Her alliances are strong, but they will be short-lived. Her own corruption creates a culture of corruption, and it will lead to a downfall with her own allies destroying her. By reading ahead, we can see there is one who is coming, one who has on his vesture. Remember, she's got it on her forehead. Well, there's one coming, and on his vesture, his name is, and on his thigh, a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, in chapter 19 and verse 16. Peeking ahead into the future chapter, right there in verse 20 of chapter 19, we see he's coming again. He's going to judge the beast and the false prophet, and he's going to cast them into the lake of fire alive. We see the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that brought miracles, and before him in which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast and that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. What do we see? It's not hard to figure out. The beast is the Antichrist. The 7 heads, he says, are 7 mountains. The 10 horns are 10 kings. The waters are the peoples, the nations, the multitudes, and the tongue. The woman is the great city Babylon, the great harlot, the mother of all harlots. She's going to be destroyed with the coming of the king. In the next chapter, we're going to read, for in 1 hour thy judgment is come. It's an appointment that no one can miss. The scene was described. It's a little strange. You might have been amazed. You might have marveled. But he says, why marvel? Come here, and I'll show it to you. And I'll explain it. The scene explained is right there. Even with that, you may not understand it all, but it's still something we can figure out and get the facts. The whole chapter. The beast, the 7 heads, the 10 horns, the waters, and the woman are clear for us to be able to see. They're described and explained in chapter 17. Next week we'll get even more. I pray that's been a